Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. And I'm delighted to have on today somebody called Lee Rasberry, who's a trainee therapist. Lee has been a kind of long time subscriber to the channel and has provided some really great feedback on some of the videos and has actually started doing the training now. So I thought it would be great if he would come on and just have a chat about his journey to beginning the training and also find out also what the training's like. And Lee has also kindly come up with a number of sort of bits of advice as well for people who are either thinking about it or in the process of doing the training, which is great. Thank you for coming on, Lee, and welcome.
Thanks very much for having me, John Paul. I can't remember how long I've been watching your videos, but I remember sitting at YouTube and thinking, oh, I really need to find a guy that had a career and then retrained as a counsellor and makes really helpful, informative videos. And then you came up. So there we go. This is
Yeah.
what I need. So yeah.
Two out of three isn't bad. Well, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And as I say, your feedback and that kind of thing as well. It's all really great when people provide that. So thank you. But maybe we could start by looking at your journey and your career journey to date and why you have thought about becoming a therapist or counsellor.
Sure, absolutely. So a little bit of background. I'm 36, married with kids, and have worked in engineering, more or less, engineering, product management, that kind of stuff, sort of 15 years now. Went to uni at the normal time and did audio technology. Really liked that because I was big into kind of computers and tech, but also big into music. So that was a nice kind of thing to study and do when I was younger. Graduated in 2010. Obviously, financial crisis, job market wasn't great. So moved back to my hometown. I started working at the company that I worked at during my year out, just as a short-term thing. And as you know, 10 years later, I'm still there and, bought a house, got married, had kids, all that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, that kind of led to a feeling of ticking those big kind of life boxes and then looking at the rest of what the world of work looked like for another 30 or so years and thinking, well, I'm not actually really enjoying this a lot. And I think I had those usual thoughts like, okay, let's try a different type of engineering, a different company, moving around a bit, and then sort of realized over quite a while that it was fundamentally not really the right thing for me. And I'd kind of fallen into it like a lot of people do, I guess,
Yeah.
because I was good at it, it paid the bills and got on well with it. But I guess I kind of outgrew it. And before this call, I thought I'd try and think about those kind of checkpoints that really jump out at me as those moments where I could feel myself shifting. Sometimes I think at the time I didn't realize, but then when you look back and you think, that was a big moment actually. So I did an MBA at Warwick Business School in 2017 to 2019.
Okay.
And, an MBA, so there's lots of different things you study, really good course. But there were a couple of modules that I really, really liked. And one of those was organizational behavior. And I found the psychology fascinating and just really enjoyed that module a lot more than the others. And then there was a coaching module. And I kind of ended up doing that. It wasn't really it was one of those electives. I thought, yeah, I'll give that a try, and absolutely loved it. Really, really liked it. It's something I'd never even thought about, been exposed to before. And the style of coaching taught was very non-directive. More akin to counselling than a lot of coaching. And yeah, it was very much a kind of felt sense of really liking those two modules, not on a cognitive level. There was something else going on there. But I think my company were paying for the MBA. I was very much enjoying my work role. So it was kind of parked, if you will. I thought, that's nice that I found these things interesting. Maybe in the distant future, something might come up. But that was probably the first little glimpse that I think like a human-centered career path would probably be better suited to me than a technical engineering nuts and bolts, pounds and pence on a spreadsheet type role. And then next big thing, no surprises for guessing, but becoming a parent. And I think big value shift. What's important before children and after children change a lot. Could talk about that for 2 hours, but I think in general you have those moments in life where the things that make you tick kind of change, sometimes very quickly, sometimes slowly. And then obviously another big event, no prizes for guessing, but the COVID pandemic. And I think we all did a lot of soul searching and introspection during those times. And it was for me I was in a new job, had two young children. We had our second in the September of 2020. So a new baby during COVID wasn't very fun. And yeah, the kind of stress and anxiety of it all got to me very much, and I had some time off work. And that's when I had my counselling. So that was my real first experience of being in the client's chair. I saw a guy for about probably 7 months, something like that. And it was transformative, really, really fantastic. He was very good. I remember covering absolutely so much, but, different person from the start of that process to the end. And that was it was more than just a kind of healing experience. It really generated an interest in, what just happened to me over these months. What did this guy do? How did he turn me around so effectively? And how have I come out of this a completely different person to what I started? So, but I remember distinctly, there's two things that I said to myself. After I did my MBA, I said I'd never do a degree again. I'm done with education. And after finishing counselling, I said to myself, I could never be a counsellor. That would be a terrible career. So maybe I need to trust myself a little less at times. So counselling was brilliant. And then I kind of thought afterwards, what do I need to do to not get back in that situation? That was kind of a healing process. How can I maintain better mental health, better coping strategies? So I started looking into various bits and pieces online, one of which was meditation.
Okay.
What do people do to kind of regulate themselves? So started looking into meditation. That got me into Buddhism in a big way, got me into kind of developmental psychology, and all sorts of different interests. And again, talking about feelings, I remember wanting to learn this stuff, but really engaging with it deeper than other things before, other interests and hobbies that were quite surface level. So I was definitely sort of discovering a different part of myself and a different passion, if anything. And all this was quite a transformative process. And there was just a little bit of me, a tiny little voice somewhere in the back of my mind that said, you could maybe do a different job where you do this kind of stuff, and probably spent months sort of telling that guy to shut up because I need to be paid. And, I've got this career, and eventually got to the point where I thought, well, actually, maybe I do need to consider doing something different. And what does that look like? And that's when I started to think, hold on a minute, maybe counselling would be an interesting career. Maybe that would be something that I would enjoy and be good at. And perhaps the sort of initial dismissal was the complete opposite of what the direction I should be going in. So probably about a year ago is when I seriously started considering it and looking at courses available and what that would look like, and also kind of thinking the ultimate question at that time really for me was, is this a viable career path? And, I knew a bit about counselling having been a client, but there was so much I didn't know. So a lot of research had to take place. I think that's quite hard in this industry. There's a lot of courses out there. Some don't really lead anywhere. They're kind of maybe skills courses might be a good way to put them. So you kind of learning those skills, but it's not a career progression that's going to take you to an accreditation and the ability to go into private practice. So I think it's a bit of a minefield. And then looked at various options, and then a friend told me about Matrix College in Norfolk, which is where I'm studying. So they run an integrative counselling degree course. It's a BSc, a 3-year course, and you go basically one weekend a month, more or less. So I can fit it around working full time still, fit it around the family life. It's an intense weekend, but it's manageable. I can fit it in as everybody on the course is doing. So I applied, got offered a place, and started there in September. And that sort of more or less brings me to where I am now, basically.
I mean, just going back on a few things, I suppose you said having children changed things for you. I mean, can you say a bit about that and what happened? It kind of changed priorities.
Yeah, I think you needed reason to get out of bed in the morning. And I think for me, career was the big one before children. So I put a lot of time and energy and thought into my career, and kind of felt that was what you meant to do. That was the only thing to do. That's what we're all meant to be doing. And then I think when you have children, especially young children, your kind of energy levels and your mental state become really important, to be the kind of best to use a term I don't really like to use, but kind of best parent, best dad you can be.
Yeah.
So I guess then there was elements of my career, stressful things or having to travel that started to negatively affect other areas of my life, especially parenting. So I guess, yeah, suddenly you have a lot more plates to spin and you have to start sort of separating your time and energy a little bit differently. And I think when you go from maybe having an abundance of time and energy to having a bit of a scarcity, then you really need to ask, well, what's important? What is most important for me? And thinking about kind of what am I getting from work? What am I getting from this career? More than just, yes, money is nice and climbing a corporate career ladder can result in a nice salary. But how really important is that for me? And what am I going to have to sacrifice to get there? And then also those kind of more covert things that I'm getting from work, like the kind of prestige and the status and the dopamine hits of nailing the projects and getting the wins and things. So I think I started to unpick that, and I think once I'd kind of shone the torch on it and thought about it more deeply, I realized some of those motivators I had, some of those behaviors were just kind of ingrained and not really even mine. They're just kind of programmed in from school. This is what you need to do, get on with it. So yeah, big value shift there. And I guess I try to look at my own values and opinions and think, okay, do I want my children to act in that way? Do I want my children to be really focused on a career? And I guess a lot of the answers to those questions, well, I'm not really sure. Definitely not a solid yes or a solid no. I guess I just felt there was more exploring to do. I needed to understand myself better.
Yeah, so I mean, eerily similar in some ways to our stories, but just as when you were saying that in the industry, you start or get more interested in the things that are about people in some ways,
yes,
more psychology and that kind of thing. And I think there is something about that, isn't there? Because at the moment, I'm thinking about a video which is about, can somebody be a good therapist? Someone has said, how the heck do I know if I'm going to be a good therapist? Because they've said that they're not that great with people. That's their perception of self, actually. And I think, what are those qualities that are often there that bring somebody towards the career? And I think one of those things does seem to be on some level, there was always somehow, somewhere, that more of that curiosity and interest in people.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's something in some people, isn't there, that seems to move them. Of course, we have to do things effort-wise to bring us towards it, but I think there's also something that some people naturally gravitate towards that. And it sounds like you've listened to it as well, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just found developmental psychology really interesting because it kind of gave me a framework to grow in, if that makes sense. I feel I was kind of, like, to use a term, paradigm locked into my views of right, wrong, good, bad, how I should be living my life. And then I think getting into psychology more kind of breaks down what you feel is maybe objective into subjective. So it just opened up my kind of view of all the different ways you can live your life and what are you trying to achieve. So that was really valuable for me. But then I realized that I was reading lots, watching loads of YouTube videos and learning massive amounts of stuff and doing very little with it. And it was very cognitive, and I've always been very cognitive. And I just remember thinking, I need to do something, not just spend the rest of my life becoming an expert on things. And that's why I wanted to join a Buddhism group, because I thought it's something very different to what I do, and it's very experiential, and it's going to get me to meet new people and do new things. And that is what I needed in that moment. So that's why I went out there and joined a local Buddhist group, because I wanted to explore the facets of myself that I'd kind of neglected, for the first 35 years of my life.
You did say that there was sort of some conflict in some ways about becoming a counsellor. Why would I do that? Or I wouldn't want to do that. Can you just say a bit about that kind of conflict and what it was that when the idea first came to mind, perhaps you thought, oh no, that couldn't be me, or not something I would do?
Yeah, I think it's maybe around empathy, really. Like I guess I didn't understand how someone could be any kind of therapist and not completely live and feel what their client's going through. So I kind of thought, God, these guys must be just miserable all day dealing with these things. And I think that's because I was really living my own misery. It permeated every part of me and my life, and I couldn't decouple it from myself. It was so real. But then I guess as I started to feel so much better, and then after the counselling finished, I looked at the whole experience very differently, and I could maybe understand more of how the process happened. And I guess maybe the cliche as well of thinking that a counsellor solves people's problems. So maybe it was a lack of confidence in myself, thinking, well, how could I possibly tell someone what to do with their life, because I've made all these bad decisions with mine and I don't know what I'm doing and I've got myself in this rut. So how could I ever advise people what to do? And then obviously when you learn about counselling and, especially the client-centered approach, for instance, you realize that that's not actually what's going on at all, and you don't need to have the answers, and you don't need to be in this position of knowledge or wisdom, to solve people's problems for them. So I think as I understood more how it works, the psychology of it and what had happened to me, I guess I reframed the whole thing in my own mind as to what it really is about.
Yes, because I think there's that important thing as well, isn't it? Of course, you do hear difficult things. People bring the most difficult things that happen to them to therapy, but there is a process. The idea is that it comes, and you talked about transformation yourself, actually, but something happens when something is brought into a relationship where the conditions are right in order to do that. And if you can establish and maintain that, things change, don't they? You talk about the transformative process yourself of being in counselling. In terms of that, of course, just to say anything that you don't want to talk about, but how would you say in general terms that it transformed things for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I must have saw my counsellor, James, for about 7 months. And if you asked me to recount a single sentence, I barely could. It's such a...
I think that's often the case,
yeah, such a strange process. But I think, knowing a bit now, he definitely took a very sort of client-centered approach. Like I said, I'm very cognitive. I always had lots to say. And I think for me, it was just being able to vocalize what was in my head. And obviously, once it comes out of the mind, through the mouth into the open air, it feels different, and you start to then, you get stuck on step one, I think, if you never speak to anyone about it, and it just goes around in your head and you just ruminate on it. But as soon as you can share it with someone, and in such a non-judgmental way, and just have them honestly and empathetically sort of ask questions and want to explore and show curiosity, suddenly all this kind of darkness that was in your head that was making you feel so bad just loses all of its power.
Absolutely.
It kind of comes out and never really goes back in.
So as you say, it changes by coming out. We're being brought into a relationship, isn't it? Depending on the response, I suppose that can be the way therapy can be different, isn't it? It's how somebody responds to it and contains it. But you were talking about person-centered, so that's a bit about, I suppose, what you may have started on the course. Just before we do that, you did come up with some really great ideas, I think, as far as advice for people, or just some ideas for people who are thinking about doing the training, things that have helped you. Could you just talk a bit about some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we all live our different lives. And sometimes there are things that would work for you that would be terrible if someone else did them. For instance, it can be very subjective, but I often think there's maybe some kind of little nuggets of wisdom that kind of speak to the human experience. They're a little bit more kind of general. So I tried to think, well, what kind of 10 things did I need to do to get from where I was to where I am? Maybe a lot of them are kind of like mental blockers, if you will. What was stopping me from moving forward? And actually coming up with the list was really cathartic as well, to be honest. And I think, to get stuck in, the first one is really important. And to me, that's what you do tomorrow doesn't devalue what you did today or yesterday. And I think, in business, they talk about the sunk costs fallacy. I can't change career. I've invested 15 years in being an engineer or a lawyer. How could I throw all that away to do something completely different? And so that was a real brick wall in my mind. And as soon as I kind of analysed that and thought, well, is that true? Is it really true? It lost its power. And I think also, I try to be kinder to myself. Something I've learned from Buddhism as well is to be kinder to myself in the sense, well, when I was fresh out of uni, I did the things that I thought were the right decisions at that time. And then, stayed in the job because I thought it was the right decision. And I wanted to be able to get married and buy a house and have children. So all those decisions were the right things then, but they don't change whether counselling is the right or wrong thing for me to do now. So I think it's really really important to not hold on to your past too much and ignore those positive feelings and signs you've got for something different just because it's, doesn't build on or work on what you've done before, and it might not be seen as career progression, or a route to earning more money or more status or something. So that one was a real big one for me. And I think number two kind of ties into that a lot, which is change is inevitable, you and the world as well. So everybody is going to change as they grow. And it might be that, 15 years ago, engineering was the most amazing thing I could do and I loved it and it was brilliant, but it doesn't mean it is now.
Sure.
So you are going to change. Everybody's going to change. And there's absolutely no harm in recognizing that and saying, okay, I'm a different person to what I was back then. And now I want to do this and I don't want to do that anymore. And that's absolutely fine. And similarly, the world changes, your circumstances change. So the career that really suited you 10 years ago, 20 years ago might have changed so much that now it doesn't suit you. So you might have remained absolutely static, but the world around you has changed. So then how do you cope with that? So embracing that change is really important wherever you see it. And conversely, trying to make everything permanent and hold on to everything and make these long-term plans can be very difficult, because then you have a concrete view of your future, and then every time things challenge it or make it more and more difficult or less feasible, you just hold on to it. I can't deviate. So that was important. And then kind of going back to my experience on the MBA is just to listen to your gut more. I think cognitively our minds are very powerful, and we can come up with an argument to do anything. We could sit here, John Paul, and come up with a great argument for you returning to being a lawyer, and it could make perfect sense and be.
I think we'd struggle.
but I bet, if we talked about that, you're going to feel. Absolutely. You're going to be like, no, I don't feel good about this. This is not what I want to do. And I think for a long time, I suppressed anything that I felt that didn't agree with the narrative in my mind. And like I said, on that MBA, I really felt those modules, those human sort of centered modules, I really, really liked. And it was more than just a cognitive experience. So, I think, especially if like me, you're in, if you're an engineer or a lawyer, they're very cognitive, brain heavy vocations. So I think you can get stuck in your head and completely detached from your kind of feelings because they're not valued in that world.
And I see, on the training as well, I've said it in the past, I do notice that in some ways the cognitive side of things, I think, can be a little bit devalued. People get called heady and that kind of thing. But I think the ideal really is that the two are combined, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That you're interested intellectually and cognitively in what you're doing, and it feels good, or you feel alive doing it. I mean, that's the ideal, isn't it? It's not that one has to be over the other. It's the two of them, I think, working together. And that's what I suppose when you were looking at the kind of more developmental stuff or the occupational psychology, that kind of thing, it was intellectual, it was cognitive, wasn't it? But it also felt interesting or exciting, or you felt passion or aliveness. And it's having those two, I think, it's the both working together. I think that's very much what happens for me with therapy. It's the two, not one is not above the other at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, we sort of have to find something that satisfies us holistically.
Yeah,
not just one domain. So next point is explore and understand your values, and we've talked about this quite a bit already. But especially in relation to point 2 about change, is your values may change. And I never sat down and sort of said, I'm going to come up with some new values for me. These things just happened. And if you've worked like a career like being a lawyer in the city, and you're very driven, and that starts to stop motivating you, I'd say you need to recognize that and say, hold on a minute, this isn't pushing my buttons anymore. It doesn't agree with who I feel I am right now. So for me, that was really important. And again, number 5, kind of touching on the Buddhism again, is seek some new experiences, real experiential stuff, and go out and do things that are different to what you've done. So again, probably like a lot of people during COVID, I got quite outdoorsy, being stuck in the house all the time. And that was something I'd never been before, and gave me an opportunity to kind of explore a different side of myself as well. So I think that's really important, and it all ties into, kind of getting to know yourself better and exploring yourself better and what makes you tick. And maybe for someone, they'll challenge something relatively minor about themselves and find that they're actually not quite who they thought they were. And then that might domino effect into kind of challenging other things in their mind that they feel is static.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like being outdoorsy, and suddenly you find yourself going for 8-hour walks every weekend. You're like, oh, hold on a minute. You know, maybe
yes.
I'm not quite who I thought I was, and maybe there's other things that I'm not quite as concrete about as I thought.
I remember somebody saying, with everybody going on their walks, it was like everybody was doing their Duke of Edinburgh during COVID. It was like when you went out for a walk, there were always another 65 people.
Yeah, and I think particularly, not to get into a chat about it, but the mental health benefits of getting out in the great outdoors were enormous. Yeah. And again, it doesn't speak to your cognitive side. You don't think how nice it is; you feel how nice it is. So that was quite important for me. And then number 6, in a kind of similar vein, is to expand your circle. I think it's very easy to stick to the people that you know, the friendship groups you've got, and maybe you've built those groups around your older version of yourself and your values. So you kind of get locked in that paradigm again of, I'm always hanging around with people that work similar jobs and are trying to get similar goals. So for me, the Buddhism group was a very different group of people to what I would normally socialize with. So I learned a lot from those people and the way they've approached life and their sort of trials and tribulations was really, really valuable. And funnily enough, when I went to the Matrix College Open Day, I was told about that entire college by someone from my Buddhist group. So if I hadn't joined that group, I'd have never gone to the Open Day and probably never gone to the college. So, there's little domino effects are always there. And then number 7, which was a massive one for me, you cannot mitigate all the risk, dangers, and unknowns. I'm very risk averse, always have been. So I think in my mind, I thought, well, I can do this retraining as long as I can work out how it's going to not cost me any money, not have any risk, not take loads of time up. And obviously that's completely impossible. So I had to get to the point where I said, well, it's going to be risky. It's going to cost some money and it's going to take a lot of time and energy. And that's just par for the course. Am I happy to take those risks? And I think I made my peace with that quite quickly. It was just that overarching question of accepting that there's going to be some risk there. And I can mitigate some of it by doing some research and make sure I go to the right institution and set the groundwork with my wife and my family and make them aware of what's going to be. So there's lots of things you can do. But then I think you just have to get to the point where you jump and go for it anyway.
Definitely. I think also, my experience would be the longer I did it, the more I did, the safer I felt in some ways. Of course, they're good, great. The questions that have to be asked financially, all those things, aren't they? How will a transition be managed if you're going to set up a private practice? All of those things. But there was something, I got less worried. They dominated less as time went on. Just because I think I would have felt safer in myself, because finding out who I was, that sort of a way of navigating the world, and felt safer around other people. So I think I just felt over time those things drifted. They're all, as I say, got great questions that need to be answered, but this sort of general, oh God, it's all going to go wrong, or it's going to be a disaster, that seemed to dissipate for me over time, just because of everything else that was happening and all the relationships that I was forming with people.
I completely agree. And I think if they weren't there, you'd really have to ask yourself if it's the right thing. Why am I more emotionally involved in this big change? Why aren't I worried about it and bothered about it and having all these kind of existential crises every now and again? So if it really matters and it's really important, then you're going to feel those things, I think, regardless. And that brings me on to number 8, which is you may never know if you don't have a go. And I got to that point as well where I thought, well, it might be the right thing to do, or it might be a really bad idea. And the only way I'm going to find out is to kind of get stuck in. And, I kind of thought it's a 3-year course. You get like a qualification after the first and second years as well. So I thought, okay, if I commit to a year, that's X amount of money, that's X amount of time. If it's really the wrong thing to do, by the end of a year, I've realized that. And I can sort of say, okay, never mind, needed to have a go at it, but found out it's not for me. And probably, trying to be optimistic, in finding out it's not for me, something else will probably appear. Like, I don't want to be a counsellor, I want to be a coach, or I want to be an organisational psychologist, or, something else would come up. So, I think sometimes you can think something to death and eventually you just need to go for it.
Yeah, just trust, I guess, too, isn't it? Trust that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another important one for me, number 9, is to think about what you're moving away from and towards. So, people can think about career change, and it might be just they've got a really bad boss, and it can be all encompassing, so, I've get on very well with the people I work with. I really like the company. I really like my boss. And I'm like, well, I'm not moving away from that. That's not what I'm trying to get away from.
Yeah.
Do I want to work somewhere else? Is it the type of engineering I'm doing? And you look at other jobs and you think, no, it's not the company. It's not the people. They're all good. So what do I want to get away from? And it's the field, it's the engineering, it's that discipline. That's not what I'm enjoying. And then what are you moving towards as well? And for me, this means kind of like, at the moment, I'm salaried in a 9 to 5, so to speak, in an organization, and I want to be self-employed, ideally, and go into private practice and have that freedom and kind of be, master of my own destiny. So I think with any change, you're moving away from several different things and you're moving towards several different things. And for me, I wanted to unpick what those different things are.
Yeah, and I think a real difficulty can often be what you're moving towards has not happened. You don't know what, the thing that's driving people forwards is often, as you described, something that they feel and are interested in cognitively.
Yeah.
In terms of experiences they've had. It could be therapy, it could be listening to podcasts, watching videos about psychology or therapy, but actually you're heading towards something on the basis of not knowing what it feels or how good it will feel, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I think that's always a difficult one. I mean, you could say it in terms of therapy, the commitment, time, financially, that cost, and it's a hope that something is going to transform and feel different, isn't it? But you don't know. I mean, that's sort of happening along the way. So that's, I think, what sustains things for people. But it is a difficult one when you don't actually know what it's going to feel like. I suppose in some ways, these sorts of videos and watching and listening to other people talk about their experiences some way down the line can be helpful, but it is all in imagination, I guess, and also based, I suppose, on some feelings about some things that have been happening already. But I think it's always a tricky one, that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially like in the kind of engineering and science world, it's all about, oh, if I do this, this will happen. And I'll test it, but I kind of know the outcome.
Yeah.
And I'll be 95% accurate, for instance. But, going into something like counselling, you really, really don't know how things are going to go. You just kind of have to trust the process, as a client or a trainee, and immerse yourself into it and see what comes out the other side, really, which is definitely quite scary. But again, sometimes you just have to say, well, this is what it is. There's going to be some risks. There's going to be some fear. And I'm never going to find out if I don't have a go at it. And then the final one for me, and this was a big one again, is think about the actual work, the real content of what you might want to move to. So, for me, it was, well, do I want to sit down in a room with one other person and do that for 20, 25 hours a week? And do I want to do that? Because that is the meat of the role, and you can be super interested in something, but it doesn't mean you want to do it all day as a vocation, whereas for me, I very much feel that is exactly what I want to do, because I feel energized by other people, so a guy I work with, we might have a lot of meetings together, with other people during the course of a day. And by the end of it, he's absolutely exhausted, whereas I'm massively energized. It's that extrovert energy, that desire to speak to people, and I'm also thinking, well, what sort of situations do I thrive in? So if you said to me, Lee, do you want to go for a walk on your own? Do you want to go for a walk with someone you know, or do you want to go to a big group of friends and go to a bar or something like that? I would always take that one-on-one interaction. That's what I enjoy the most. So it's thinking about, well, what sort of job, what sort of work would suit me and what I enjoy. So if you were massively interested in say counselling and psychology, but you really like teaching, or you like groups or training, then maybe some sort of mental health trainer or something would be
right.
So sort of like, I like the field, but what is the actual work content in these different vocations, and which one is really going to appeal to me? And I guess it's interesting because it ties into that question you were talking about earlier. What does it take to be a good therapist, or can I be a good therapist? And I guess it speaks to that, like what do you really enjoy? Because if you don't enjoy sitting one-on-one and chatting to someone about deep, important issues, then perhaps that, doesn't mean you're not going to be a good therapist, but it might mean you don't enjoy it,
Yeah, completely. I think it is. I mean, as you say, there has to be that, certainly on a one-to-one, if that's what somebody wants to do. And that can come, I mean, it might be for somebody when they say that not great with people. And that's the sort of thing that comes up for me when I hear somebody say that, is they may not have been great with the people that they're around now, or have been up until this point, or with the things that they believe about themselves and other people now. So if somebody's got some social anxiety, for example, that really does disconnect in relationship with others, doesn't it? If all I'm doing the whole time is thinking that they like me, they don't like me, it's not going well, is it? They hate me. That, not to be flippant about it, but that really does change what somebody gets from relationship with others. And if somebody goes through that process of, through therapy or training to be a therapist and sitting with clients, and suddenly people feel safer with people and, into more that space of creativity, they're less fearful of others, in fact, not fearful of others, then people seem really different, actually. So one of the things I'll be saying when talking about it is, I think, to reserve judgment, I think, and just to see what happens as you go through that process. Because the other thing as well, I mean, we'll talk about your experience of starting the training. Another thing which I've really noticed is being in a room with people who sort of see things, everybody's different and unique, but similarly in some ways, if that, has been your experience, where the values are similar. I sort of, sort of strangers like me in some ways. I think that when I started in that room, of course, there are people that have never been near a therapy room who there'd be similar values and qualities, but there was something about starting that, which is being around people who saw the world quite similarly. Maybe we can come on to that, but just before we come on to starting the training and what that's been like for you and how you found it, I just wanted to ask something. You mentioned your wife and sort of clearing it with your wife in some ways. What's the feedback from people been to you about changing the career? Have people largely been supportive? Have you had people who said, why would you do that? Or I don't think you should do that? Or, you've talked about your own internal things that have come up for you internally, but as far as relationships with others, what have people said?
It's a really good question. And actually, I would say, 95% plus hugely positive.
Yeah.
And about me specifically. So, I'm thinking about retraining as a therapist. The common response is, you'd be great at that. What a great idea. So it is, it's a lot of validation. And it's nice to hear that. And I'd like to think that people would be honest. But sometimes I think people can't help but be honest, and if it really didn't land, they'd say, oh, okay, that's interesting. But yeah, very, very positive. And I think with the people that know me well, they can see me in that environment. It makes sense. It's kind of congruent. Like, oh yeah, Lee would be good at that. He would enjoy that. That is a good career path. They might have also thought, God, why is he here doing all this engineering? He's absolutely rubbish at it. By the time he found something he's good at. But no, really, really supportive from the people that know me well and quite well, which is great. And those little kind of micro sort of enthusiastic cheerleaders along the way has really helped sort of keep me grounded, because it's not just all in my head. Other people think this is the right thing for me as well, to sort of check in and get that encouragement has been really important.
Fantastic. Good. So you started.
Yep.
And how has it gone? What are you enjoying? Any challenges? Anything you're finding difficult?
Yeah. So, I absolutely love being at uni. It's a weird feeling, because I feel extremely present when I'm at the college, really engaged, even for the whole day. And I think, it's a long day. It's a full day of kind of learning and triads and different bits and pieces. So it's quite sort of draining, but yeah, I just feel really engaged and really calm, when I'm there. It's a very different sort of mindset. And obviously, I've studied before different things. So, but it feels very different to the very cognitive stuff I've learned in the past. So yeah, sort of in terms of sort of the experience, it's very much like a feeling of I'm in the right place, doing the right thing, basically. Brilliant. And yeah, like the sort of the point you made about strangers like me, is absolutely true, because it's a very diverse group, different ages, different backgrounds. yet I feel so much sort of in common with everybody there. And obviously there's a little bit of selection bias because they've all gone through an interview process to get a place on the course. But yeah, really feeling like a sort of group of like-minded people, and kind of all celebrating that difference and that similarity at the same time, and not letting it be a problem, which can happen on other courses, different vocations. It's all about, the little factions form and the hierarchy gets created and things. But no, it feels like a real sort of, I can't think of a way of describing it that doesn't seem a bit cheesy or a bit fake. But
be cheesy. What is it you want to say?
I don't know. We've joked quite a bit about, like, jinxing the group by being too positive about it, and obviously thinking that by the end of the third year we'll all have fallen out 15 times. And but yeah, it feels like a safe group, a group where people can kind of bring their real selves to it and be open and share and be honest.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like if one person were to say something negative, it's not going to be a pile-on. It's going to be, it's a sort of caring environment, a defensive environment that values honesty and openness and congruence.
So interesting you saying that, because one of the things I was in this video about being how the heck do I know if I can be a good therapist? One of the things which I was talking about is kind of those qualities that seem to be present in people. And again, they're present in, of course, general population too, but seem to be more present around therapists. And I would say not necessarily as much competitiveness seems to be around. There seems to be an openness. If somebody says something, there is an openness to it rather than necessarily getting somebody to bend the knee or arguments or those kind of things. I mean, those things happen during the training. There is reactivity, isn't it? People are going into environments where some people have experienced trauma and a lot of hurt, and hurt people sometimes hurt people, and traumatized people sometimes traumatize people. But generally, there is there's quite a lot of self-reflection that can come with it quite quickly. And I always noticed, a couple of years ago, I noticed going for different parties around Christmas, actually. And one of the parties was a party of therapists, which sounds like a huge amount of fun. But what I noticed was that I felt calmer around a group of therapists, actually. And again, this is only in very general terms. So of course, there are individuals in all kinds of different environments who've never been near a therapy room who I would feel safe and calm around. But I really noticed it, that they didn't feel pressured to say that much or be any particular way. It was just, it all seemed to be okay. There's that general kind of acceptance, not to paint it in some perfect way, but a lot of the things you're saying, I can really have been my experience too, definitely.
Yeah, I think something you said in a previous video is about when you were a lawyer. It's a role. You are playing a role. So even if you're feeling completely lost and fear, and you really uncertain about what to do in a certain situation, you've got to suppress that and put forward the lawyer that knows what he's doing. And I get a similar amount, feeling in engineering. Whereas I think as a counsellor, the value is in being congruent and open and honest. And if you're feeling something negative, saying, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed with this situation or something.
Definitely. And that is sort of what was at the bottom of you don't want to do that, or empathy, sensitivity, those things that would seem to be lower down the list of in importance for working for me in a law firm. Suddenly they're right at the top. They're the important things,
exactly.
And that is that's a profound difference in relationships in life and how you see yourself. I think it really flip reverses kind of thing. What considered to be of value and importance, not how much you can pretend to enjoy something. It's actually, do you? And if you don't, the important thing is to say it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think from a client point of view, does a client want to sit down with their new therapist and think that this guy's got all the answers? Because that's not very human, is it? That creates very much a power imbalance of, I'm the client that knows nothing, and here's a guy that understands me better than I understand myself, and has got all the answers. That's quite intimidating, really. So you're absolutely right. There's a complete flip of values and traits that are seen as important in one area and completely unimportant or harmful even in a different field. So but real positive feeling on the course. I think the standard of teaching at Matrix is very high, which is part of the reason I chose to go there, as well as it being integrative. I wanted to kind of learn a broad spectrum of modalities and skills, and and not kind of specialize. But yeah, I mean, it's early days. I've done 3 weekends so far. But yeah, so far it's been, 95% plus positive and a really good experience. I've got a few deadlines at the moment, so the stress is creeping in a little bit.
Okay.
And the reminder that it is an academic course and there's going to be work to be done. Work, in that sense is sort of takes the fun out of it occasionally, but that's, you got to take the rough with the smooth on that front, unfortunately.
Anything else you found difficult about it or challenging, or is it generally going in the way you would like it to so far?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only thing the big challenge for me is kind of fitting it in, fitting in all the work, all the reading, and being able to show up. Obviously, with young children, you're catching bugs off them all the time, and you get ill, and you get under the weather and tired. So there's definitely a sense of pressure, like, oh, I've got uni this weekend, I can't afford to be ill. For instance, those sort of things. So I mean, they're all general. That could be said of any course or any work or challenge. But yeah, that's probably the toughest thing. Is just fitting it in amongst all the other stuff, because it's not a box ticking exercise. I don't want to just go to uni and sit there for 16 hours and then come home. I really want to engage with it, with kind of all of my mind, body, and soul. So it's wanting to bring the best version of myself there and really give it my all. But we've only got 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, so it's tough fitting it all in. But luckily I've got that drive and that passion and desire to do it. So it kind of puts yourself high up the priority list naturally, if that makes sense.
Completely. Yeah, I mean, it really comes through in how you're talking. As far as the future, how do you see that? You talked about private practice, but what's your plans for the future with it?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a plan, but a loose plan. So I don't get too wedded to any particular kind of outcome. I think private practice would be ideal for me, and where I'll be just about 40 and the kids will be kind of 8, 9-ish. So I can see that working on a kind of lifestyle level, financial level, would be good. But I'm trying to keep my options open because something else might come along that pulls me in a different direction. Yeah, it feels a long way away at the moment. But it's a motivator, because the thought of having that kind of that freedom, that agency over my own career in that way is a real motivator for me.
Definitely. And you were talking about private practice, and one of the other things as well, isn't it, is there's that range of things that you can do. I mean, you've mentioned yourself the kind of academics too, and some people get employed and organize retreats and do corporate coaching, all kinds of things. Somebody was saying, because in one of the videos I was talking about a portfolio career, so doing a number of different things, and they said, oh, in terms of making enough money, they think I'm going to have to have a portfolio career, but they said, oh, I feel too lazy to do that. When I think about it, lots of different things. But again, it's one of those things that I think, why don't you reserve judgment until you start to do those different things? Because then it's very different doing lots of different things that you don't particularly get a lot from, and you're kind of having to do to please somebody else or whatever it is. Very different as far as the emotional energy that you can get from doing things that you really love and enjoy. It's leaving an open mind, and of course it changes over time, doesn't it? Even if you think now at the end of it, I'd like to do this, there are things that can come up. And the great thing about working for yourself is you can reshape things and make that 3 days a week and that 2 days, or bring it down to 4. And I mean, it's not as simple as that with commitments with clients and that kind of thing, but it is it's a process over time. But I mean, yeah, we're about running out of time, but it's been so interesting listening to you talking about it. You're so engaging, obviously interested in it. I think there's a lot of what you said which is going to be helpful for people. It's very sort of eerily similar, a lot of the things that you say, to things that I've thought and felt on my journey as well. So yeah, it's been lovely listening to you, and thank you for the time and effort you've put into talking about it.
Oh no, I appreciate the opportunity, John Paul. It's very cathartic, I think, sometimes to kind of check in with yourself.
Yeah.
So it's been a nice exercise, and like you said, it's a different type of career path. And I think where I was a year ago, trying to work out what direction to go in, there isn't a lot of resources out there to kind of help people, guide themselves on this journey. It's not like, oh, I want to be a doctor, so it's medical school and you do this and this and this and then you this, and it's quite prescribed.
Yeah.
maybe that's a bad example, but just sprung into my mind. So I think if this video helps 5 people work out, a bit more that they're on the right track, or maybe they're not, and that's a good resource to put out. So yeah,
absolutely. And I really do think it will. So yeah, so thank you. It's been great. Maybe at some point down the line in your journey, you can come back on and let us all know how it's going, and it'd be good to hear.
Yeah, I'll be back on in 6 months, and I'll have retrained as a tree surgeon or something like that.
There you go. Brilliant. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming on, and yeah, hopefully we'll speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot, John Paul.
All right. You take care.